I'm Javier, 32 years old, and I never thought my life would turn out this way. From being kicked out at 16 to now owning multiple properties, I've come a long way. The irony: my sister Rebecca got pregnant in college and Mom welcomed her with open arms. The same mom who threw me out without a second thought. But that's not even the craziest part. Last month, my sister's jobless boyfriend tried to break into my house with a crowbar. Before I get into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button because family dynamics change drastically when money enters the picture. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, life seemed pretty normal from the outside. We had a small 3-bedroom house with a decent backyard where neighborhood kids would gather to play basketball on weekends. My father was around until I turned 8. Then one day he just packed his bags and left. No dramatic goodbye, no tearful farewell, just an empty closet and my mother Martha sobbing in the kitchen. That day changed everything in our household. Mom suddenly had to work 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She would leave early in the morning for her administrative assistant position at a local insurance company, come home to make a quick dinner, then head out to her evening job waiting tables at a family restaurant downtown. The financial strain was evident in the growing number of past due notices on our counter and the increasing frequency of boxed macaroni and cheese dinners. My sister Rebecca was 3 years younger than me, and perhaps it was because she was younger or maybe because she was the spitting image of my mother, but the favoritism was apparent from early on. Rebecca was the golden child who could do no wrong in my mother's eyes. She brought home perfect report cards, participated in ballet recitals, and knew exactly how to make my mother smile, even on her most exhausted days. I, on the other hand, struggled academically. What I didn't know then but discovered years later was that I had undiagnosed ADHD. Sitting still in class was torture, and despite trying my best, my grades never matched my sister's achievements. When Rebecca brought home an A+ on her math test, Mom would put it on the refrigerator for weeks. When I managed to pull a B- after studying for hours, the response was usually, "If you applied yourself like your sister, you could do so much better." Around 13, I discovered I had a knack for computers. A neighbor was about to throw away an old desktop and I asked if I could have it. Taking it apart, figuring out what was wrong, and putting it back together became my obsession. Soon I was fixing computers for neighbors and classmates, teaching myself through trial and error and internet tutorials. Mom saw this as a distraction. "You spend all this time playing with computer parts when you should be studying," she would say. Rebecca doesn't waste her time on such nonsense. The comparison was constant and cutting. Every conversation somehow circled back to how I should be more like my perfect sister. One particular incident stands out in my memory. I had fixed our next-door neighbor's computer, removing viruses and upgrading some components. Mr. Patterson was so pleased he paid me $200. I was ecstatic, planning to use that money to buy more tools and parts for future projects. When I proudly showed my mother the money, instead of congratulating me, she took it from my hands. "This will help with the electric bill," she said, tucking it into her purse. "At least your hobby finally contributed something to this family." The only person who seemed to see potential in my interests was my grandfather Thomas. He lived about 20 minutes away, and whenever possible I would bike to his house to escape the tension at home. Grandpa had been a mechanic all his life, and understood the satisfaction of working with your hands. "Different people have different gifts, Javier," he would tell me while teaching me to use his tools. "Your sister might be book smart, but you have practical intelligence. You can see how things work, how to fix them. That's valuable too." Grandpa also taught me the basics of business. He explained concepts like profit margins, customer service, and the importance of saving money. "Always put away at least 20% of what you earn," he advised. "You never know when you'll need a safety net." When I was 15, Grandpa Thomas passed away from a sudden heart attack. I was devastated, not just because I'd lost my biggest supporter, but also because I'd lost my safe haven. In his will, he left me $2,000, specifying it was for my future education or business ventures. Mom took control of that money too. "You're too young to manage this," she declared. "I'll keep it safe until you're older and more responsible." That money disappeared into our household expenses, just like the $200 I'd earned. When I asked about it a few months later, she bristled and reminded me of all the sacrifices she made as a single mother. The conversation ended with me feeling guilty for even asking, and her reminding me how ungrateful I was compared to my sister. By the time I entered high school, the dynamic was firmly established. Rebecca was the perfect daughter who made life easier for our struggling mother. I was the problem child who reminded Mom too much of the husband who had abandoned her. The gap between us grew wider with each passing day, and though I tried to bridge it, nothing seemed to work. Little did I know that the breaking point was just around the corner. By 16, I had managed to land an after-school job at Electrofix, a local electronics repair shop owned by Frank Rodriguez. Frank was impressed by my self-taught skills and took a chance on me despite my age. For the first time, I felt valued for my abilities, rather than compared unfavorably to someone else. The shop became my sanctuary, a place where solving problems earned praise instead of dismissal. I would work from 4 to 8 every weekday evening, and full days on Saturdays. The money wasn't great minimum wage plus small commissions on repairs I completed, but it gave me independence and a sense of purpose. I started saving up, dreaming of eventually opening my own repair business. The fateful day happened in October, a Tuesday that started like any other. I went to school, struggled through classes, then headed to work. When I got home around 8:30, my mother was waiting at the kitchen table, her face a mask of fury. On the table in front of her lay a small plastic bag containing marijuana. "I found this in your backpack," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I was looking for the permission slip for Rebecca's field trip, and instead I find drugs." My heart sank. The bag wasn't mine. A friend had asked me to hold it during lunch period, and I had completely forgotten to give it back. I tried to explain, but Mom wasn't interested in explanations. "Do you think I'm stupid?" she shouted, her calm facade crumbling. First, the falling grades, then the obsession with those stupid computers instead of a real education, and now drugs. "You're turning out just like your father." The comparison to my father, the man who had walked out on us, was like a slap across the face. I tried again to explain, my voice rising to match hers, insisting the drugs weren't mine. The argument escalated quickly, years of resentment and misunderstanding bubbling to the surface. "I have worked myself to the bone trying to give you and your sister a decent life," she screamed. "And this is how you repay me, by bringing drugs into a house where your little sister lives. What kind of example are you setting?" "You've never given me credit for anything," I shouted back. "Nothing I do is ever good enough for you. Rebecca is always perfect, and I'm always the screw-up." The fight continued, getting uglier by the minute. Mom brought up every mistake I'd ever made, every disappointment I'd caused. I countered with accusations about her favoritism and lack of support for my interests. It was as if all the tension that had been building for years had finally found its outlet. Finally, red-faced and shaking, Mom pointed to the door. "I want you out of this house," she said. I laughed, thinking it was an empty threat. "Right, and where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem. You want to act like an adult, making adult decisions like doing drugs. Then you can be an adult and find your own place to live. I've had enough. You have 24 hours to get out." The laughter died in my throat when I realized she was serious. "Mom, come on," I said, my anger giving way to panic. "I told you the drugs aren't mine, and I'm 16. You can't just throw me out." 24 hours, she repeated, turning away from me. "Figure it out." I spent that night in a state of shock, alternating between rage and disbelief. How could she do this? Was she even legally allowed to kick out a minor? I called friends, but most couldn't offer more than a couch for a night or two. Their parents wouldn't allow a long-term stay, especially with the vague explanation I could provide. In desperation, I called Frank from the repair shop. Despite it being nearly midnight, he listened patiently as I stumbled through an explanation of my situation. "I have a small apartment above my garage," he said after a moment. "It's nothing fancy, just a studio with a bathroom. But you can stay there until we figure something out. Rent can be worked out through extra hours at the shop." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a wave of sadness so intense I had to muffle a sob. How had it come to this? How had my own mother decided I was so worthless that she would throw me out with nowhere to go? The next day I returned home after school to pack my belongings. Mom was there coldly watching as I stuffed clothes and a few precious possessions into garbage bags. Rebecca, 13 at the time, stood in the doorway of my room, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't go," she whispered. "Ask Mom, not me," I replied, too hurt to soften my tone. "She's the one kicking me out." Rebecca turned to our mother, but Mom shook her head. "This is between your brother and me. He's made his choices." As I carried my bags to the door, my mother's parting words cut deep. "Don't come back until you've learned to respect my rules." I walked the 2 miles to Frank's place, dragging my life in garbage bags, tears blurring my vision despite my efforts to hold them back. That night, on a thin mattress in a stranger's garage apartment, I cried myself to sleep for the first time since I was a small child. I was 16 years old and, as far as I could tell, completely alone in the world. The first few weeks at Frank's garage apartment were a blur of adjustment and survival. I had to quickly learn how to manage everything on my own, from laundry to grocery shopping to budgeting my meager income. The apartment was small, just a single room with a kitchenette in one corner and a tiny bathroom. The furniture consisted of a twin bed, a folding table with 2 chairs, and a dresser Frank had found at a yard sale. But it was mine, a space where no one compared me to anyone else. Continuing high school while working became increasingly difficult. I was exhausted all the time, trying to maintain passing grades while putting in as many hours at the shop as possible to pay for food and necessities. After 3 months of this grueling schedule, I made the hard decision to drop out and pursue my GED instead. "You sure about this?" Frank asked when I told him. "Education is important." "I know," I replied. "But right now, survival is more important. I can get my GED, then maybe take some community college courses later." Frank nodded slowly. "All right. But I'm making it a condition of your employment and housing that you follow through on that GED. No excuses." With more time to work, I threw myself into learning everything I could at Electrofix. Frank proved to be not just an employer, but a mentor, teaching me advanced electronics repair techniques, inventory management, customer service, and basic accounting. Under his guidance, I became the go-to person for phone and laptop repairs. "You have a gift," Frank told me, after I successfully repaired a water-damaged MacBook that 2 other technicians had declared unsalvageable. "But more importantly, you have determination. That will take you further than natural talent ever could." Taking Frank's advice and my grandfather's earlier lessons to heart, I started putting away 20% of every paycheck into a secured bank account. Some weeks this meant eating ramen noodles for days straight, or walking to work in the rain because I couldn't afford bus fare. But the growing number in my savings account gave me a sense of security I desperately needed. While I focused on building financial stability, my social life withered. Former high school friends moved on to proms, graduation, and college applications, experiences I watched from the sidelines. Occasionally I'd see them when they brought devices to the shop for repair, but our conversations grew increasingly awkward as our lives diverged. The holidays were the hardest. That first Thanksgiving, Frank invited me to join his family dinner, but I felt like an intruder in their warm, chaotic gathering. Christmas was even worse. I called home, hoping the season might have softened my mother's stance, only to have her cut the conversation short after perfunctory exchanges. "Rebecca misses you," she said before hanging up. "You should think about how your choices affect her." No acknowledgement that she missed me. No invitation to visit. Just another reminder of how I had allegedly failed the family. I tried again on my 18th birthday, showing up at the house with a small cake and a hopeful heart. Mom let me in, but the atmosphere was strained. Rebecca hugged me tightly, talking a mile a minute about school and friends, while Mom watched with arms crossed. When I mentioned possibly moving back home now that I was legally an adult with a steady job, her response crushed whatever hope I had harbored. "We've adjusted to our lives without you," she said flatly. "Rebecca has her own space now, and it would be disruptive to change things again." I left that day understanding that being thrown out hadn't been a temporary punishment. It had been a permanent exclusion. Around that time, I met Wilson Chang, a real estate investor who frequently brought his electronic devices to our shop. Wilson was always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, drove a sleek BMW, and treated everyone with unexpected kindness. He became interested in my story after several conversations during repairs. "You remind me of myself at your age," he told me one day. Smart, hard-working, but dealt a tough hand. I'm renovating a property over on Elm Street. Could use someone with your technical skills to help with the electrical and security system installation. Pays better than repair work if you're interested. The side job with Wilson opened my eyes to an entirely new world. I discovered that Wilson had started with nothing, buying his first dilapidated property with a risky loan and renovating it himself. Now he owned dozens of rental units across Phoenix. Under his mentorship, I learned about real estate markets, property renovation, tenant management, and the power of leveraging assets. The secret is to see value where others see problems, Wilson explained as we walked through a house with peeling wallpaper and outdated wiring. Most people look at this and see endless work. I see that the foundation is solid, the location is excellent, and with $20,000 in renovations, I can increase the value by $60,000. By 21, I had saved enough from my repair work and side jobs with Wilson to make a life-changing decision. With my savings as a down payment and a high-interest loan that made my stomach churn with anxiety, I bought my first property, a fire-damaged duplex that the bank had foreclosed on. For 6 months, I worked my regular job during the day and spent every evening and weekend renovating the property. I slept only 4 hours a night, surviving on coffee and determination. Frank worried about me, but Wilson understood. "This is the price of entry," he said. "Pay it now so you can build the life you want later." When the renovations were complete, I rented out both units for enough to cover the mortgage payment plus a small profit. Standing in the empty unit after the tenants signed their leases, I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I had experienced before. From homeless teenager to property owner in 5 years. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. My beginning built with my own 2 hands and nobody's help. What I didn't realize then was that while I was building my financial foundation, I was also constructing walls around my heart. Success became my refuge, achievement, my only reliable companion. The deeper the roots of my independence grew, the more difficult it would become to reconnect with the family that had discarded me. But life has a way of forcing connections we aren't prepared for, as I would soon discover. 4 years after purchasing that first duplex, life looked dramatically different. At 25, I owned 3 rental properties. Generating steady income, had established a side business specializing in smart home installations, and had moved from Frank's garage apartment to a comfortable 2-bedroom condo I owned. Outright. Frank had made me partner at Electrofix, giving me a 10% stake in the business for my years of dedicated service. I had created the stable, independent life I had dreamed of, as that scared 16-year-old with garbage bags full of possessions. But success came with an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. My days were full of work, tenant issues, property maintenance, and business decisions. My relationships remained superficial, limited to business associates and casual acquaintances. Trust didn't come easily after what had happened with my family. The call from Rebecca came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing applications for a newly vacant rental unit. Seeing her name on my phone screen was so unexpected that I almost didn't answer. We had minimal contact over the years, occasional text messages on birthdays and holidays, but nothing substantial. "Javier." Her voice sounded small, uncertain. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Something in her tone made me set aside the applications. "Is everything okay?" A pause followed by a stifled sob. "Not really. I'm pregnant." Rebecca was 22 in her final year of college, studying elementary education. The news itself wasn't shocking, but her distress was palpable through the phone. "The father is my boyfriend, Tyler," she continued. "We've been dating for about a year. Mom is furious. She found out yesterday and we had this massive fight. I've never seen her so angry." The irony wasn't lost on me. The mother who had thrown me out at 16 for alleged drug possession was now furiously confronting her golden child over an unplanned pregnancy. Part of me, the part still nursing years-old wounds, felt a twisted satisfaction. The perfect daughter had finally disappointed the unpleasable mother. "I'm sorry," I said, pushing away the uncharitable thoughts. "That must be really hard. How are you feeling about the pregnancy itself?" "Scared, overwhelmed, but I want to keep the baby. Tyler says he's supportive, but he's still finishing his degree too. We're not really prepared for this." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near her campus the following day. Seeing Rebecca in person after so long was strange. She had grown from the tearful 13-year-old in my doorway to a young woman with our mother's eyes and our father's stubborn chin. Her hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach as we talked. "The craziest thing happened after you called yesterday," she told me, stirring her decaf latte. "Mom completely changed her position. She called me last night crying, saying she overreacted and that she wants to support me. She's invited me and Tyler to move back home after graduation so we can save money once the baby comes." I nearly choked on my coffee. Seriously, the same woman who threw me out with nowhere to go is preparing a welcome home party for you and your boyfriend. Rebecca winced. I know it seems unfair, but she's different now, softer somehow. She's already talking about converting the spare bedroom into a nursery. I think the idea of being a grandmother has changed her perspective. The double standard stung. My mistake, which wasn't even really mine, had cost me my home and family. Rebecca's mistake was being welcomed with nursery decorations and support. I tried to be happy for her, truly I did, but the conversation left me with a bitter taste that had nothing to do with the coffee. "She asks about you sometimes," Rebecca offered as we were saying goodbye. "I think she regrets how things happened." "Not enough to pick up the phone herself," I replied. "Would you answer if she did?" I didn't have an answer for that. A week later, Rebecca called again, this time to invite me to dinner at our mother's house. "It would mean a lot to have you there," she pleaded. "Tyler will be there too. It could be a fresh start for all of us." I declined as politely as I could. The wounds were still too raw, the contrast between our treatments too stark. Instead, I sent an expensive stroller and car seat combo to their baby shower, with a card signed simply Uncle Javier. It was the best I could offer. The next 2 years were a blur of business growth and personal stagnation. I built my first custom home at 27, a modern 3-bedroom with large windows and a spacious home office. The real estate portfolio, that had begun with that risky duplex purchase, now included 8 properties. Frank and I expanded Electrofix to a second location in a growing part of town. On paper, my life was a success story. Local business magazines featured me in their 30 under 30 issues. Banks that had once denied me loans now called offering special financing packages. I had everything I had worked for, and more. But each night I returned to an empty house. Attempts at dating inevitably faltered when the conversation turned to family. How do you explain to someone that your mother threw you out at 16 and you haven't really spoken since? Most people either didn't believe me, or worse, assumed there must be more to the story, some terrible thing I had done to deserve such treatment. My most promising relationship was with Daniela, an interior designer I met while renovating a property. For 3 months, things were good, easy. Then came her family's annual reunion picnic, to which she wanted to bring me. "They'll love you," she assured me, "and I'd really like to meet your family too. Maybe we could do dinner with them next weekend." I tried to explain my situation, but the more I talked, the more confused and concerned she looked. "I just don't understand how a mother could do that," she said finally. "There has to be more to it." "There isn't," I insisted. "Some parents just pick favorites. Some parents just don't love their children equally." She ended things a week later, citing communication issues and different values regarding family. What she meant was, she couldn't reconcile the successful, seemingly normal man in front of her with the 16-year-old boy who had been deemed so unworthy of love that his own mother had discarded him. So I built more houses, bought more properties, expanded the business further. Achievement became my relationship success, my companion. I told myself it was enough. Sometimes I almost believed it. Rebecca sent baby pictures and occasional updates. My niece Lily was a chubby-cheeked infant, then a curious toddler, then a precocious preschooler. I sent gifts on birthdays and Christmas, but maintained my distance. It was easier that way, cleaner. Until the day my carefully constructed separation came crashing down with an unexpected knock at my door. The knock came on a Sunday morning, as I was reviewing plans for a new property development. 3 sharp raps, confident and demanding. I wasn't expecting anyone, and solicitors rarely made it past the neighborhood security gate. Opening the door revealed 3 people I hadn't seen together in over a decade, my mother now with streaks of gray in her once uniformly brown hair, Rebecca looking tired but still youthful, and a small girl with a gap-toothed smile, who could only be my niece Lily, now 7 years old. "Surprise," Rebecca said weakly while my mother stood stiffly beside her. Shock kept me frozen for a moment, before basic manners kicked in. "Come in," I managed, stepping aside. They filed past me into the living room, Lily immediately gravitating toward the large windows overlooking the backyard pool. "You have a swimming pool," she exclaimed with childlike wonder. "I do," I replied, smiling despite myself at her enthusiasm. "It's heated too." An awkward silence fell among the adults, as we seated ourselves, the weight of years and unspoken grievances filling the space between us. My mother looked around the room, taking in the high ceilings, modern furniture, and obvious signs of prosperity. "Your home is lovely," she said finally, her tone containing a note of surprise that irritated me. What had she expected? That I'd be living in squalor? "Thank you," I replied coolly. "What brings you all here today?" Rebecca and my mother exchanged glances. "We wanted to see you," Rebecca began. "It's been too long, and Lily has been asking about her uncle." The little girl nodded vigorously from her spot by the window. "Mommy shows me your pictures. She says you're super smart with computers and houses." "That's very nice," I said, softening slightly. "But I'm guessing there's more to this visit." My mother cleared her throat. "We should catch up first. How have you been, Javier? Business going well?" The superficial pleasantries continued for about 20 minutes. I answered questions about my work, while they shared sanitized updates about their lives. Rebecca had completed her education degree, but wasn't currently teaching. My mother had retired early due to arthritis, making her waitressing job too painful. Lily was in 2nd grade and loved art and science. What they didn't volunteer, but I gradually pieced together, was that Tyler, Rebecca's boyfriend and Lily's father, had been unemployed for nearly 3 years. They had been evicted twice from apartments for non-payment of rent. For the past year, they had been living with my mother in the house I grew up, in an arrangement that was wearing thin. "It's getting a bit crowded," my mother admitted. 3 adults and a child in a 3-bedroom house. Tyler and Rebecca have to sleep in her old room, which barely fits a double bed. I nodded, wondering when they would get to the real purpose of their visit. I didn't have to wait long. "We've been thinking," my mother continued, placing her teacup carefully on the coffee table, "that it might make sense for Rebecca and her family to have more space. Someplace they can really build a life together." "I'm sure there are affordable apartments," I suggested. "Actually," Rebecca interjected, "we were thinking about something more permanent. Tyler has been struggling with finding work in his field, and rent keeps going up everywhere." "Which brings us to why we're here," my mother said, sitting up straighter. "You have several houses from what Rebecca tells me, 3 that you live in yourself." I frowned. "I live in this one. The others are investment properties with tenants." "Still," she pressed, "you have all this." She gestured around the room. "Surely you could help your sister out. Family should support family." It took a moment for their intention to fully register. "Are you asking me to give Rebecca one of my houses?" I asked incredulously. "Not give necessarily," Rebecca quickly amended. "Maybe let us live in one for a reduced rent, or some kind of rent-to-own arrangement." "Or yes, give them one," my mother stated bluntly. "You have 3 houses, Javier. You don't need them all. Your sister has a child to think about." The audacity left me momentarily speechless. These people who had barely been in my life for 16 years were asking me to hand over a property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to a sister I barely knew, and her chronically unemployed boyfriend. "Those properties represent years of hard work," I said when I found my voice. "I bought them with money I earned, starting from nothing. Less than nothing, actually, since I was homeless at 16. My mother's face hardened. "Are you ever going to let that go? It was 16 years ago." "Let it go." I stood up, anger bubbling to the surface. "You threw me out of the house with nowhere to go. If Frank hadn't taken me in, I would have been sleeping on the streets. And now you waltz in here and ask me to give you a house." "Not me," my mother corrected. "Your sister. Who has your niece to consider?" She looked pointedly at Lily, who had wandered into the kitchen out of earshot. "This is unbelievable," I muttered, pacing the room. "You didn't care where I would sleep when you threw me out, but I'm supposed to care about Rebecca's housing situation." "That was different," my mother insisted. "You were rebellious, bringing drugs into the house." They weren't even mine, I exploded louder than intended. I told you that, but you didn't listen then, and I bet you still don't believe me now. Rebecca jumped in, tears forming in her eyes. Please, Javier. Things are really tough right now. Tyler tries, but his degree in philosophy isn't opening many doors. Lily deserves stability, a yard to play in. She's your blood, too. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I'll tell you what I said, reining in my anger. I won't give you a house. That's completely unreasonable. But I can help you with a security deposit and first month's rent on an apartment. That's a reasonable way to help family. An apartment? My mother scoffed. In what neighborhood? Do you want your niece growing up somewhere unsafe? There are plenty of safe, affordable areas in this city, I countered. I'll even help you find one. This is so typical, my mother spat. Success has made you selfish. After everything we did for you growing up. The hypocrisy was staggering. What exactly did you do for me? Throw me out without a second thought. Take the money. Grandpa Thomas left me. Constantly compare me to Rebecca and find me lacking. The argument escalated from there, years of resentment pouring out from both sides. My mother accused me of being ungrateful for the sacrifices she had made as a single parent. I reminded her that those sacrifices apparently didn't extend to helping her son when he needed it most. Rebecca cried, claiming she had always wanted us to reconcile but now saw that I was too bitter to move forward. Eventually, Lily wandered back into the room, her small face concerned at the raised voices. The adults quickly modulated their tones, but the tension remained palpable. I think we should go, my mother announced, standing abruptly. Clearly, Javier has forgotten what family means. As they gathered their things, Rebecca made one last attempt. Please reconsider, Javier. We're really desperate. I offered to help with an apartment, I reiterated. That offer stands. But I'm not giving anyone a house. They left with cold goodbyes, Lily looking confused as she was hurried out the door. The moment their car pulled away, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You owe your family. Tyler. Over the next week, the messages grew increasingly aggressive. Calls from Tyler demanding to discuss options for housing his family. Texts suggesting I was selfish and heartless for making my niece suffer. Voicemails with thinly veiled threats about what might happen if I didn't step up and do the right thing. I blocked the number after the 7th call, only to have him start using Rebecca's phone instead. The situation was spiraling, but I held firm. I had worked too hard for everything I had to simply hand it over because of family guilt I didn't even deserve to feel. What I didn't realize was how desperate Tyler had become, or what lengths he would go to in his entitlement. The security system alert that woke me at 2 a.m. was just the beginning of a night that would permanently change our family dynamics. The piercing chime of my phone's security app jolted me from sleep at exactly 2:17 a.m. Groggily reaching for the device, I expected to see another false alarm triggered by a neighborhood cat or strong wind. Instead, the notification showed motion detection at one of my rental properties, a small 3-bedroom ranch-style house that had been vacant for 2 weeks between tenants. Fully awake now, I opened the app to access the security cameras. The night vision footage showed 2 figures on the back porch, one tall and lanky, the other shorter and stockier. The taller man was working on the back door with what appeared to be a crowbar, while his companion nervously scanned the yard. My first instinct was to call the police, but something made me hesitate. There was something familiar about the taller figure's movements. Zooming in on the grainy footage, my stomach dropped as recognition hit. It was Tyler, Rebecca's boyfriend, and Lily's father, attempting to break into my property. I threw on clothes and grabbed my keys, racing to my car, while simultaneously calling 911 to report a break in progress. The property was about 15 minutes from my house, and I drove well above the speed limit the entire way, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Arriving before the police, I parked a few houses down and approached cautiously. The security lights I had installed illuminated the yard in harsh white light, and I could hear frustrated cursing from the back of the house. Keeping a safe distance, I called out, "I can see you, Tyler. The police are on their way." The cursing stopped abruptly, followed by whispered conversation I couldn't make out. Then Tyler stepped into view, crowbar still in hand. Even in the security lighting, I could see his face was flushed, likely with alcohol as much as exertion or embarrassment. Javier, he slurred slightly. Man, this isn't what it looks like. Really. Because it looks like you're trying to break into my property with a crowbar. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively backed up. Look, Rebecca said we could stay here. She said you were being difficult but would come around eventually. We just needed to get settled first. That's a lie, I replied, keeping my distance. I never offered this house to anyone, and even if I had, breaking in with a crowbar isn't how you move in. Tyler's companion emerged from the shadows, a nervous-looking man I didn't recognize. Dude, let's just go, he urged Tyler. This was a bad idea. No, Tyler shouted, suddenly angry. He owes us, living in his big fancy house while we're crammed into that tiny place with Martha. It's not fair. He took another step toward me, brandishing the crowbar. You think you're better than us because you got lucky in real estate. It wasn't luck, I said, continuing to maintain distance. And threatening me with a weapon isn't going to change my mind about anything. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the tension. Tyler's friend immediately took off running, disappearing into the night. Tyler hesitated, looked from the crowbar in his hand to me, then made a decision I'm sure he regretted later. He lunged forward. This is your fault, he growled, raising the crowbar. You could have just helped us out. I managed to dodge his clumsy attack, the crowbar whistling through empty air as I scrambled backward. Thankfully, the police cruiser pulled up at that exact moment, bathing the yard in red and blue lights. Tyler froze crowbar, still raised, as two officers emerged with weapons drawn. Drop the weapon, one shouted. Hands where we can see them. The fight seemed to drain out of Tyler all at once. The crowbar clattered to the ground, and he sank to his knees, hands raised in surrender. As the officers handcuffed him, he fixed me with a look of pure hatred. Rebecca's going to blame you for this, he spat. You've ruined everything. The next few hours were consumed with police reports and statements. Tyler was arrested for attempted breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, and menacing with a weapon. His blood alcohol level was well above the legal limit, adding public intoxication to the charges. His friend had escaped, but was identified through the security footage. I was still at the police station when my phone rang at 5 a.m. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. How could you? She sobbed as soon as I answered. Having Tyler arrested, do you know what this will do to Lily? Rebecca, he tried to break into my property with a crowbar. I explained, exhaustion making my voice flat. Then he threatened me with it when I confronted him. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to help your family, she cried. Not call the police on them. He was committing a crime, I said, with a weapon. This isn't about family, it's about the law. You've always been selfish. She spat, her tone suddenly reminiscent of our mother. Always thinking only about yourself. Well, congratulations. Tyler's going to lose his latest job prospect over this and will probably get evicted again. I hope you're happy. Before I could respond, another voice came on the line. My mother. I knew letting you back into our lives was a mistake, she said coldly. You're destroying this family all over again. I'm destroying the family, I laughed incredulously. Tyler tried to break into my house with a crowbar. How am I the bad guy here? You could drop the charges, she suggested. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. And I'm not dropping anything. The call ended with more accusations and tears. By the time I finally got home, the sun was rising, and my phone was filled with messages from family members. I barely knew cousins and aunts, taking sides in a situation they understood only through my mother's biased lens. Amid the chaos, one message stood out. A text from an aunt I hadn't spoken to since childhood. This isn't your fault, Javier. Can we talk? Aunt Susan was my mother's younger sister, a woman I remembered vaguely as being kinder and more patient than my mother. Curious and desperate for an ally, I called her back. I've stayed out of this for too long, she said, after we exchanged awkward greetings. But what Martha did to you as a teenager was wrong, and what's happening now is wrong too. Over the next hour, Susan filled in gaps in my understanding of my own family history. My mother had always shown signs of favoritism, even as a child, preferring certain friends over others in extreme ways. When my father left, She had transferred all her expectations and emotional needs onto Rebecca, creating an unhealthy dynamic for both her children. "She's not a bad person," Susan explained, "but she never dealt with her own abandonment issues from your father leaving. Rebecca became her emotional support while you reminded her too much of him." "That doesn't excuse throwing out a 16-year-old, I said. "Nothing excuses that," Susan agreed. "I told her so at the time, but she wouldn't listen. By the time she might have been ready to reconcile, you had built your walls too high, and I don't blame you for that." Learning about this pattern didn't erase the hurt, but it helped me understand it wasn't simply about me being unlovable. The conversation with Susan continued to other topics, catching up on 16 years of missed family connections. She had 2 children of her own, both in college now, and had divorced her husband 5 years earlier. "Family is complicated," she said toward the end of our call. "But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can maintain boundaries without complete estrangement." Even with someone who tried to break into my house with a crowbar, I asked dryly. "Well, maybe not him," she conceded. "But Rebecca and Lily haven't done anything wrong. And your mother, for all her flaws, is getting older. Maybe it's time for some healing on your terms." The conversation with Susan gave me a new perspective, but I still had to decide what to do about Tyler's charges and my fractured family relationships. After much reflection, I made my decision I would maintain the charges against Tyler, whose background check had revealed prior arrests for petty theft and drunk and disorderly conduct that my family had conveniently never mentioned. But I would also reach out to Rebecca separately, offering help that came with clear boundaries and expectations. The text war with extended family continued for days, with people taking sides based on incomplete information and long-held biases. I stopped engaging, focusing instead on the path forward that felt right to me. It wouldn't be easy, and reconciliation wouldn't happen overnight if it happened at all. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was making choices based on my own values rather than reacting to old wounds. 2 months after the break-in attempt, Tyler pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. He would serve 30 days in jail, followed by 18 months of probation and mandatory alcohol counseling. During the court proceedings, additional details emerged about his history of aggression when drinking and financial irresponsibility that had contributed significantly to his and Rebecca's housing instability. Rebecca initially refused to speak to me, convinced that I had deliberately ruined her life by pressing charges. But as the full extent of Tyler's issues became clear through the court process, her anger began to shift. A week after his sentencing, she called me. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice subdued. "Can we meet somewhere? Just us." We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe near my office. Rebecca looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that spoke of prolonged stress. "I'm leaving Tyler," she announced without preamble. His lawyer shared some things about his past that he never told me. There were other arrests before I met him, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend. He's been lying to me for years. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want to see my sister suffer. "Don't be. I should have seen the signs. The constant excuses about jobs falling through, the money that disappeared, the way he'd get aggressive after drinking." She sighed deeply. "The truth is, we've been struggling for years because of his issues, not just bad luck like I told myself." The conversation shifted to practical matters. Rebecca and Lily needed a place to live away from both Tyler upon his release and our mother, whose enabling behavior had contributed to the situation. I meant what I said before I told her. "I can help with a security deposit and first month's rent on an apartment. But I have conditions." "What conditions?" she asked warily. "You need to have a plan for self-sufficiency. I'll help with education costs if you want to get additional certification to make your teaching degree more marketable. I'll help with childcare costs so you can work. But I won't just hand over money indefinitely with no end goal." Rebecca seemed taken aback by the offer. "You'd do that after everything that's happened." "You're my sister," I said simply, "and Lily is my niece. But I need to know you're committed to standing on your own feet." We spent the next hour outlining a plan. Rebecca would enroll in a special education certification program that would make her more employable and increase her potential salary. I would help with an apartment in a good school district for Lily, plus assistance with childcare costs, until Rebecca completed her certification. In return, Rebecca would maintain clear boundaries with Tyler and work toward complete financial independence within 2 years. My mother was less receptive to the new arrangement. When Rebecca informed her of the plan, her reaction was predictably defensive. "So you're choosing your brother over your daughter's father," she demanded. "After he had Tyler arrested, I'm choosing what's best for Lily." "And me," Rebecca replied with newfound firmness. "Tyler needs to sort himself out, and I need to build a stable life for my daughter." The first family dinner after all these changes was awkward at best. My mother had reluctantly agreed to meet at a restaurant neutral territory for all of us. She was cold toward me, initially responding to my questions with clipped answers while lavishing attention on Lily. Gradually, as the evening progressed, some of the tension eased. Lily's natural exuberance served as a buffer, her innocent questions and observations, forcing the adults to respond normally for her sake. By dessert, my mother had thawed enough to ask genuine questions about my business and life. "You've done well for yourself," she acknowledged, a hint of surprise still in her voice. "I didn't think. Well, I didn't know what would happen to you." "You didn't stick around to find out," I replied, unable to completely hide the lingering hurt. She looked down at her plate. "No, I didn't. That wasn't my finest moment as a mother." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I had ever expected to receive. The path to true reconciliation would be long and uncertain, but it had at least begun. In the months that followed, I focused on healing my own wounds while building a relationship with my niece. Lily was a bright, curious child who loved to hear stories about electronics and how houses were built. She reminded me of myself at that age, full of questions about how things worked. "Uncle Javier, why does the light turn on when you flip the switch?" she would ask, or, "How do they make glass so clear when sand is all gritty?" Each question was an opportunity to connect, to be the supportive adult I had wished for as a child. Meanwhile, I started seeing a therapist to work through the abandonment issues and trust barriers I had built over the years. Dr. Miranda helped me understand that while my mother's actions had been inexcusable, continuing to define myself by that rejection was limiting my ability to form meaningful connections. "You've proven your worth through achievement," she observed in one session, "but have you allowed yourself to believe you're worthy of love, just for being you?" It was a question I couldn't easily answer, a journey I'm still on today. Rebecca thrived in her certification program, discovering a passion for working with children with learning disabilities. "I keep thinking about how you struggled in school," she told me once. "How different might things have been if someone had recognized your ADHD earlier?" My mother and I established a cautious relationship, not close but not estranged either. She never offered the full apology or acknowledgement I might have wanted, but small comments and gestures suggested some regret for the past. At 72, she was unlikely to dramatically change her perspective, but the sharp edges of our interactions had softened. The first genuine family dinner at my home came 6 months after Tyler's release from jail. He wasn't invited, having chosen to move to California after completing his sentence. Rebecca brought Lily, and my mother came bearing a homemade pie, an olive branch of sorts. As we sat around my dining table, the conversation flowing more naturally than I could have imagined possible a year earlier, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't the perfect family reunion of sentimental movies. There were still awkward pauses and careful avoidance of certain topics. But it was real, and it was a beginning. Later that month, I met Amanda through a business connection. She was a financial advisor who had recently relocated to Phoenix, intelligent and direct, in a way I found refreshing. On our third date, I took the risk of sharing my full family history, bracing for the judgment or disbelief I had encountered in the past. Instead, she listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and then shared her own complicated family story. "Families are messy," she said. "Anyone who tells you theirs isn't is either lying or incredibly lucky. It's too soon to know where this relationship might lead, but for the first time, I'm allowing myself to be fully known by someone, vulnerabilities and all. It's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. What I've learned through this journey is that forgiveness isn't a single moment but a process. Some days I still feel the sting of that 16-year-old's rejection. Other days I can see my mother as a flawed human doing her best with the emotional tools she had. The important thing is that I no longer allow that past to dictate my future. For those of you watching who might be struggling with family trauma or rejection, I want you to know that healing is possible. It doesn't require pretending the hurt never happened or forcing relationships that remain toxic. It requires honoring your own worth, setting healthy boundaries, and being open to connection on your terms. Breaking cycles of toxic behavior isn't easy, but it's necessary, especially when younger generations like my niece Lily are watching and learning from our examples. I'm determined that she will grow up knowing consistency, boundaries, and unconditional love, a combination I never experienced as a child. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who hurt you? How did you balance self-protection with the desire for connection? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the family you build can be just as meaningful as the family you're born into.